Hey guys, what's going on? Today I'm going to talk about Alibaba's recent antitrust probe. Is it an impulsive scrutiny or a deliberate intervention by the Chinese government? So on Christmas Eve, Alibaba went down by 13% on the New York Stock Exchange. That was the biggest plunge since its Ant Financial's IPO halt back in November. So what is this antitrust probe about? Apparently this investigation is about the pick one from two practice taken by Alibaba. So Alibaba and JD.com are China's biggest internet giants. And in recent years, Alibaba's Tmall has launched major sales events like Singles Days. So I've mentioned Singles Day sales in my previous episodes. Around the week of November the 11th, China has the biggest sales events. Just to give you an idea, so during the Singles Day week, the sales volume in China is much more than the Black Friday weekend in North America. Sales events like Singles Days are the biggest opportunities for sellers in China in the whole year. And the pick one from two practice by Alibaba simply means that the sellers can only get on one of the two platforms. So sellers have to make a choice between Alibaba's Tmall and JD.com. The consequence of not complying with the pick one from two policy could be a nightmare for small sellers. So the platform could block the search traffic to the non-compliant vendors or sellers. So for example, the sellers won't show in the top 50 search results. So this pick one from two practice has existed since 2013, and there was a major lawsuit between Tmall and JD.com issued by JD.com back in 2017, but nothing came into fruition as far as the lawsuit goes. So this antitrust investigation is meant to preserve fairness and competition on the e-commerce platforms. Platform is essentially a mini market, and practice like pick one from two is really causing less competition among platforms, which is bad for both sellers and consumers. Consumers would have to pay more, even possibly at an exclusive price negotiated between sellers and platforms. And sellers can't sell as many because their price simply isn't low enough. So what could be the potential outcomes out of this investigation? So the first possibility is if the authority is determined enough, meaning that they charge Alibaba with abuse of market dominance. So according to the antitrust law in China, they could fine Alibaba with 1% all the way to 10% of last year's revenue of Tmall. FYI, Tmall had 430 billion of gross merchandise volume in 2019. So even 1% of that would equal to $4.3 billion. Ouch, that hurts. The second possibility is because this investigation is unprecedented in China, even the antitrust law was passed back in 2008 and there were numerous amendments since then, but it was never enforced. If the central government couldn't give any direction or hint, then the local government probably wouldn't want to fine Alibaba big time because after all, Alibaba is their biggest taxpayers. So a more probable outcome, in my opinion, is somewhere in the middle. So which would set as an example for other e-commerce giants to follow suit. We probably wouldn't know the result for another while because the investigation has just started. But the media, especially foreign media, has already decided to make the punchline sound like Alibaba plays by China's rules, which is true, but why does the Chinese government want to crack it down at this time? So I consider this probe as a follow-up move of the blockage of the Ant Financial's IPO. So long story short, Ant Financial is Alibaba's financial subsidiary. It would have made the biggest IPO in the world's history this past November until getting halted by the Chinese government. I might make an episode about Ant Financial when I find out more. But these two actions against Alibaba signify that China has reprioritized fairness over efficiency, at least in the micro environment. This might sound a bit vague and general at first, but please continue to watch as the next few minutes is instrumental for us to understand the reasons behind these somewhat harsh government interventions. So as a fairly young government, The PRC has been trying to find a good balance between fairness and efficiency in different stages. So the first stage is from 1949 to 1978. In that period, the People's Republic was just founded, so it had to emphasize fairness by redistributing farmlands to peasants or farmers. That was unprecedented compared to the Qing Dynasty or the Republic of China period. So the government ensured the wealth was shared evenly among people. So although people's incomes were minimal at the time, but they were similar. And the wage increase was also minimal in that period. As a consequence, the economy didn't grow rapidly in that period at all. The second stage is from 1979 to 2011, because the previous period ended with major economic hardship after the Cultural Revolution. The leadership decided to pivot to efficiency. So in that period, people had heard slogans like, "Be it black or white," "Knowing how to catch rats makes it a good cat," or "Let some people get rich first." So in that period, China experienced rapid economic growth, which was culminated by the overtake of Japan as the world's second largest GDP in 2010. But the side effects were that people became much more materialistic and the corruptions existed at all levels, and huge income gaps emerged between the wealthy and the poor. Then came the third and last stage, which is from 2012 to now. So the government has reprioritized fairness while preserving efficiency. So there were numerous anti-corruption campaigns, which had put hundreds of guilty government officials in jail, and huge emphasis was put on the depovertization cause on the civilian level. So my previous episode about Ding Zhen was a good example of depovertization cause. Despite of those efforts, at some point, the homegrown internet giants entered the financial sector by disguising peer-to-peer or P2P lending and high-interest loans as financial products. Basically, they trick small businesses and not so well informed normal citizens into taking debts that they simply can't afford. This is further jeopardizing low-income people's lives now that the internet giants' platforms are driving small businesses and street vendors out of business by home delivery of virtually anything. With fairness back in mind, of course, the government has to pull the plug on some questionable practices by the internet giants. It's always a rebalancing game between fairness and efficiency on the government level. It's just at this point in time that the government thinks it's necessary to call a timeout with internet behemoths like Alibaba. So it's possible that Ant Financial might not go IPO for another while and Alibaba might get a huge fine. But think about how the CEOs at those US tech companies had to testify in front of Congress or Senate, or the US tech companies get lawsuits from EU all the time. So I don't think it's the end of the day for the Chinese e-commerce giants, with most of them being public in the US. When it comes to China, we just need to put a bit more into perspective, because first, China is not a capitalist country, and second, China is still figuring things out in this antitrust area. That's all I want to say for now about Alibaba's recent antitrust probe. I'll see you in the next episode. If you like this video, give me a like and subscribe.